Samuel Collins stood in the pre-dawn cold, watching his foreman drag another dead heifer from the winter pasture. The 7th this month. His breath misted in the December air as he stared at the wasted animal, its eyes glazed and body thin despite the full feed stores just 50 yards away. "Same as the others," Jake muttered, wiping his hands on his coat. "Don't make no sense. Full belly, good water, just wastes away like something's eating them from inside." Samuel said nothing. What could he say? That he'd spent 3 months watching his operation die piece by piece? That the wealth his father left him couldn't solve a problem he didn't understand? Behind them, the barn door creaked. Thomas appeared in the opening, small in his too large coat. 6 years old and already learning that the world took things away. The boy watched the dead cow with solemn eyes. "Is she sick like the others, Papa?" "Yes, son. Go inside where it's warm." Thomas didn't move. Samuel saw the question forming on his son's face, the same question that haunted Samuel's nights. "Are we going to be okay?" 3 months ago, in a moment of clarity, he now questioned. Samuel had written to a matrimonial agency in Philadelphia. The letter had been practical, almost cold. He needed someone to help raise Thomas. The house echoed too loud with just the two of them rattling around in it. 2 years since Margaret's death, and he still set 3 places at dinner before remembering. The agency promised someone suitable for frontier life and skilled in domestic management. Someone to make the house feel less empty. Someone to give Thomas what Samuel couldn't: softness, attention, the gentle presence of a woman who might help the boy remember what family felt like. He'd requested arrival by Christmas, a gift of sorts, wrapped in practicality. Now, watching another animal die of causes he couldn't name, the timing seemed absurd. What kind of man brought a mail-order bride into a failing operation? What kind of fool pretended his house was a home when his livelihood was crumbling beneath his feet? The foreman was muttering something about curses and Indian burial grounds. Samuel dismissed it with a wave. He didn't believe in curses, but he believed in failure. He'd watched it creep closer every day since Margaret died, as if his grief had somehow infected the land itself. His grand stone house set on the hill behind them, built with his father's money and his father's pride. It mocked him now, all that inherited wealth, and he couldn't save a single cow. Snow began falling, small flakes that caught in Thomas's hair. The boy looked up at him with those worried eyes, and Samuel felt something crack in his chest. "Papa, are we going to be okay?" Samuel opened his mouth to say yes, to lie with the confidence his father would have shown. Instead, he reached down and took his son's hand. "I don't know yet, Thomas, but I'm trying to figure it out." The words tasted like defeat, but they were honest, and honesty was all he had left to give. Tomorrow the train would arrive with his mail-order bride, a woman who expected to step into a prosperous ranch and a ready-made family. Instead, she'd find a desperate man watching his legacy die one animal at a time, with no idea how to stop it. The snow fell harder. Samuel squeezed his son's hand and led him back toward the house, leaving the foreman to deal with the dead. The Christmas Eve train hissed steam into the cold afternoon air. Samuel stood on the platform with Thomas, scanning the descending passengers for the woman he'd expected. Someone small, perhaps, overwhelmed by the frontier's harshness, clutching her bags and looking for rescue. Instead, Emma Whitmore stepped down with the calm authority of someone who knew exactly where she was. She wore practical traveling clothes, carried a worn leather satchel, and supervised the porter handling her trunk with efficient direction. The trunk bore labels from agricultural supply companies. Her eyes swept the platform, the town, the mountains beyond. Assessment, not wonder. When her gaze found Samuel, she walked straight to him. "Mr. Collins?" "Yes, ma'am. This is my son, Thomas." She crouched to the boy's level. "Hello, Thomas. I'm Emma. I'm pleased to meet you." Thomas stared at her with open curiosity. "Did you really come all the way from Philadelphia?" I did. It's quite a journey. She rose, turning back to Samuel. Shall we? The wagon ride home felt wrong from the first mile. Samuel had prepared small talk about the weather, the town, the house. Emma asked different questions. What breeds do you run? Mostly Herefords, some Longhorn mixed in. Calving schedule? Spring, mostly March and April. How do you manage rotation? Samuel's hands tightened on the reins. We move them between the home pasture and the far grazing areas. Been doing it that way for 20 years. I see. She was watching the landscape with that same assessing gaze, not judging exactly, but measuring, calculating something he couldn't name. Thomas had no such reservations. He chattered from the back of the wagon about the sick cattle, the mysterious deaths, how Papa was worried but wouldn't say so. Emma's expression sharpened. How many have you lost? 7 this month, Samuel admitted. More the month before. May I see the grazing areas tomorrow? It wasn't quite a request. Samuel felt something shift in his chest, irritation mixed with something else. Hope, maybe. Or fear that she'd confirm what he already suspected, that he'd failed at the one thing his father had trusted him to do. Dinner that first night, Emma set down her fork and looked at him across the table. Thomas was busy with his potatoes, unaware of the quiet tension building. Mr. Collins, I should explain something about myself. Please. My late father ran an experimental farm outside Philadelphia. For 15 years, I assisted him in testing new agricultural methods, soil management, plant identification, livestock health protocols. He believed in applying scientific principles to farming. Samuel nodded slowly. That's admirable. The community thought him eccentric. After he died, his research was dismissed. His farm was sold. She met his eyes directly. I came west seeking a place where my knowledge might prove useful. Since Eastern men dismissed a woman's agricultural expertise regardless of its validity. The words hung in the air. Samuel heard what she wasn't saying. I didn't come here to cook and keep house. I came here to use my mind. Thomas looked up. Can you help our cows? I'd like to try, if your father permits it. She was watching Samuel, waiting. He felt the ground shifting beneath assumptions he hadn't known he was making. He'd wanted companionship, domestic help, someone to fill the empty spaces in his house. She was offering something else entirely. Tomorrow, he heard himself say. I'll show you the grazing areas tomorrow. That night, lying awake, Samuel stared at the ceiling and wondered what he'd brought into his home. Not the quiet, manageable presence he'd imagined. Something more complicated, more challenging, possibly more dangerous to the careful walls he'd built around his grief and his pride. Christmas morning arrived, cold and bright. Samuel sat in his study, surrounded by ledgers that showed the same story in numbers that the dead cattle showed in flesh. Failure, steady and undeniable. He could hear Emma and Thomas outside, their voices carrying through the frozen air. When he looked through the window, he saw them in the winter pasture. Emma crouched beside some frost-covered plants, pulling a small notebook from her coat. She was sketching something, her pencil moving with quick precision. Thomas crouched beside her, mimicking her careful observation. She pointed to different parts of the plant, explaining something Samuel couldn't hear. The boy nodded, asked a question, listened to her answer with complete attention. Samuel watched them and felt something he hadn't expected. Exclusion. His son was learning something important, and Samuel wasn't part of it. His father would have seen this as weakness, needing help, accepting instruction from anyone, much less a woman. The old man had built this ranch through pure force of will and instinct. He'd known cattle the way some men knew cards, reading their needs without thinking. Samuel had inherited wealth and land. He hadn't inherited that instinct. Margaret's death 2 years ago had broken something in him. The ranch started failing shortly after, as if his grief had poisoned more than just his heart. He'd been operating on autopilot ever since, repeating his father's patterns without understanding their purpose. The mail-order bride arrangement had been his one concession to needing help. But he'd imagined help in the domestic sphere, someone to manage the house, care for Thomas, let him continue pretending competence in the areas that mattered. Emma was offering something entirely different. That evening at dinner, she presented her assessment with quiet confidence. I've identified 2 species in your grazing areas that concern me, larkspur and locoweed. Both are toxic to cattle in sufficient quantities. Samuel set down his fork. We've always had some of those plants, never been a problem before. They shouldn't be present in such concentration. Their dominance indicates poor rotation practices. You're not giving the land enough time to recover between grazing periods. The good forage is being depleted. The toxic plants are taking over. Jake's managed our grazing for 20 years. Then Jake's methods are killing your cattle. The words hit like a slap. Samuel felt his jaw tighten. That's quite an accusation based on one morning's observation. Emma didn't flinch. She simply opened her notebook and showed him detailed sketches of the plants, with notes in a precise hand. Then she pulled out a leather-bound journal, her father's, she explained, filled with botanical drawings and research notes. This is larkspur. See the distinctive flower shape? Even dried, even in winter, it retains enough toxicity to sicken cattle who are desperate enough to eat it because nothing else remains. She turned pages showing him documentation spanning decades. This is science, Mr. Collins, not accusation. Samuel stared at the drawings. They were beautiful and damning in equal measure. What do you propose? I can map your entire property, identify the toxic areas, propose rotation schedules that allow the land to recover and good forage to return. But, she met his eyes, I won't just give orders you follow blindly. You need to understand the principles behind what I'm teaching. You need to know what you're doing and why, or it won't last beyond my presence. Thomas was watching them both, his gaze moving back and forth like he was observing something momentous. Samuel thought of the dead cattle, of the bank letters he'd been avoiding, of his son's future crumbling while he clung to pride and comfortable ignorance. His father would have thrown her out for presumption. Samuel looked at his son's hopeful face, then back at Emma's steady gaze. Show me, he said. The words felt like surrender. Or possibly salvation. He wouldn't know which until it was too late to turn back. The work began the day after Christmas. Emma laid out her plan over breakfast. They'd survey the property systematically, section by section. She'd teach them plant identification, soil assessment, the principles of sustainable grazing. Thomas listened with shining eyes. Samuel listened with clenched jaw. The first morning in the frozen pasture, Emma knelt beside a cluster of dried plants. Thomas knelt beside her immediately. Samuel stood above them, feeling awkward and oversized. This is larkspur, Emma said, touching the brittle stem. See how the seed pods form? That star pattern is distinctive. Even dried like this, even in winter, it contains alkaloids that attack the nervous system of cattle. She pulled out her notebook, sketching quickly. Thomas watched, fascinated. Why don't the cows know not to eat it? He asked. Instinct helps, but instinct fails when they're desperate. When good forage is depleted, they'll eat whatever's available. That's why rotation matters. We give the land time to grow what they need, so they never get desperate enough to eat what will kill them. She looked up at Samuel. What does your current rotation schedule look like? He explained it, or tried to. As he talked, he realized how little he actually understood about why his foreman moved cattle where and when. He'd simply trusted it. Trusted tradition. Emma listened without judgment. Then she asked another question, and another. Each one revealed another gap in his understanding. By noon, Samuel felt like a schoolboy being gently shown how much he didn't know. The physical work was brutal in the winter cold. Emma never complained. She tramped through snow in her practical boots, mapping and sketching and teaching. Her breath misted as she explained water drainage patterns and wind direction and how they affected plant growth. Thomas absorbed it all like drought-struck soil soaking up rain. Samuel struggled against years of assumptions being systematically dismantled. That evening, his remaining ranch hands gathered in the barn. Jake the foreman stood with his arms crossed. "We doing this now? Taking orders from some woman who's been here 3 days?" The other men shifted. Uncomfortably. Samuel felt their eyes on him, waiting. "We're not taking orders," Samuel said carefully. "We're learning better methods. Methods that say everything we've done for 20 years is wrong. Methods that might save this operation." Jake spat into the straw. "Book learning don't mean nothing out here. Real experience. Real experience is killing my cattle," Samuel interrupted. His voice came out harder than he intended. 7 dead this month, Jake. More before that. Whatever we've been doing, it's not working." The silence stretched. Jake's face reddened. "You're making a mistake, boss. Letting some woman turn everything upside down because she's got pretty eyes and smooth talk?" Samuel felt the moment's weight. He could back down, smooth things over, maintain peace with men who'd worked for him for years. Or he could do what terrified him most, trust someone who might be wrong, but who at least offered a reason for their methods instead of blind tradition. "That's enough. Either support what we're trying to do or find work elsewhere." Jake stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once, sharp and bitter, and walked out. 2 other hands followed him. The rest stayed, but their faces showed doubt. That night, Samuel sat at his desk with Emma's botanical sketches spread before him. Thomas was asleep. The house was quiet except for the settling of old wood and cold air. He heard footsteps on the stairs, then Emma appeared in the doorway. "I didn't mean to cause problems with your men." "You didn't cause them. They were already there. I just hadn't been brave enough to face them." She stepped into the study, looking at the sketches. Learning is hard, especially when it means admitting what you didn't know. "I don't know much, apparently." "You know enough to recognize when something needs to change. That's more than most men manage." She touched one of the drawings gently. "My father spent 30 years being mocked for his methods. The community called him eccentric, impractical. After he died, I watched them buy his land and immediately revert to the old ways. Everything he learned, everything he proved, just buried with him." Samuel heard the pain beneath her careful words. "That's why you came west." "I came west hoping the frontier might be braver than Philadelphia. That people who'd already left everything behind might be willing to try new things." She met his eyes. "Was I wrong?" "Ask me in 6 months," Samuel said, "after we know if this works." "It'll work. Science isn't guesswork." "Then why are my hands shaking every time I think about what happens if it doesn't?" Emma smiled, sad and understanding. "Because you're not just risking your pride, you're risking your son's future. That's what courage actually looks like, being terrified and trying anyway." She left him alone with the sketches and the quiet. Samuel sat until the lamp burned low, looking at plants drawn in careful detail, and wondered if learning to see differently was the same thing as learning to hope. February brought deeper cold and clearer skies. The work continued, methodical and exhausting. Emma's maps grew more detailed. Thomas's vocabulary expanded with scientific terms. Samuel felt his worldview tilting on its axis, uncomfortable and necessary. The evenings developed a rhythm. Thomas would ask Emma questions over dinner, and she'd answer with a teacher's patient enthusiasm. Samuel would listen, adding his own questions when he could. The house felt less empty than it had in 2 years. One night after Thomas was asleep, Emma lingered at the fire. Samuel poured them both coffee and settled into the chair across from hers. "Tell me about your father," he said. Emma was quiet for a long moment, watching the flames. He was brilliant and stubborn and completely convinced he was right, which he usually was, but that didn't make people listen. They mocked him, called his methods unnatural, said he was trying to outsmart God's design. What did he say to that? That God gave us minds to use them. That understanding creation was honoring it, not defying it. She sipped her coffee. After he died, his farm sold within a month. The new owner ripped out everything Father had planted, went back to conventional crops. All those years of research, all those careful observations, just gone. Buried with a man people thought was eccentric. Samuel heard the grief she tried to hide. That's why his journals matter so much to you. They're proof he was right, proof his life meant something. Her voice went quiet. I thought if I came west, found somewhere his methods could actually be applied, maybe his work wouldn't be completely lost. Maybe I wouldn't be completely useless. Useless? Samuel set down his coffee. Emma, you're saving my ranch. Am I? Or am I just another eccentric woman playing with plants while everyone waits for me to fail? Vulnerability in her voice startled him. She always seemed so confident, so certain of her knowledge. But beneath that certainty lay the same fear that lived in him. The fear of being inadequate, invisible, dismissed. You want to know what I hoped for? Samuel said. When I wrote to that agency, I hoped for someone to make my house less empty. Someone to help Thomas remember what family feels like. Someone to fill the spaces Margaret left behind. Did you get what you hoped for? No. I got something completely different. He met her eyes across the firelight. I got someone who's teaching me what I should have learned years ago. Someone who's showing my son that knowledge matters more than tradition. Someone who's making me question everything I thought I knew about myself. Is that a good thing? It's terrifying, but yes. He paused, searching for the right words. You're not useless, Emma. You're not eccentric or dismissed or invisible. Not here. Not to Thomas. Not to me. Her eyes glistened. She looked away quickly, blinking hard. My father used to say the hardest part wasn't being right. It was watching people refuse to see it because of who was telling them. He died thinking his life's work was pointless. It wasn't. It's here, in those journals, in what you're teaching us. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Emma spoke again, her voice steadier. I was so lonely in Philadelphia. After Father died, I was just the daughter who'd helped with his experiments. No one wanted my knowledge. They wanted me to cook and sew and be decorative and quiet. I felt like I was disappearing. I know that feeling, Samuel said quietly. After Margaret died, I just went through motions. Running the ranch the way Father had taught me, raising Thomas the way I thought I should, never admitting I was drowning. It's lonely, pretending to be adequate when you know you're not. You're not pretending anymore. No, you won't let me. She smiled then, real and warm. Is that such a terrible thing? The worst, Samuel said, smiling back. And the best. I can't decide which. The next morning, Jake confronted Samuel in front of the remaining hands. His voice was loud, meant to carry. So we're really doing this? Changing 20 years of practice because some woman says so? Samuel felt. The moment's wait. Every man there was watching, waiting to see what he'd say. Whether he'd back down to preserve peace. We're changing 20 years of practice because it's killing our cattle, Samuel said clearly. Miss Whitmore has explained the science behind what we're doing. She's shown me the research. She's answered every question I've asked. That's more than tradition ever did. It's not natural. What's not natural is watching animals die for no reason I can explain. What's not natural is refusing to learn something better because it comes from an unexpected source. Samuel's voice hardened. Either support what we're doing or find work elsewhere, Jake. I meant what I said before. Jake stared at him, jaw working. Then he turned and walked toward the barn, not quite stomping, but close. 2 hands followed him. Samuel watched them go and felt something release in his chest. That evening, Thomas showed Emma his mother's old garden plot behind the house. She walked through it carefully, noting sun angles and soil quality. "We could plant here in spring," she said. "Vegetables for your table, but also teaching plants. I could show you companion planting, how certain plants help each other grow." Thomas's face lit up. "Really? If your father agrees." They both looked at Samuel. He saw his son's eager face, Emma's careful hope, and realized with sudden clarity that somewhere in the past months, they'd stopped being 3 separate people sharing a house. They'd become something else, something that felt dangerously close to family. "I think that's a fine idea," he said. That night, lying alone in his bed, Samuel admitted the truth he'd been avoiding. He'd prayed for a wife by Christmas, someone to fill empty spaces and help raise his son. Instead, he'd received a partner who challenged him, taught him, made him face his inadequacies and grow beyond them. And somewhere along the way, gratitude had become something deeper. The thought thrilled him and terrified him. Because loss, he understood. But hope? Hope was dangerous territory for a man who'd watched everything he loved turn to dust. Late February, the blizzard struck without warning. Emma and Thomas were at the far property line, finishing the last section of their survey. Samuel was in the barn when the wind changed. Jake appeared in the doorway, his face grim despite their tensions. "Storm coming. Bad one." Samuel felt his heart drop. "They're at the north pasture. I'll gather them in." They rode out into wind that cut like knives. Snow began falling in sheets. Samuel pushed his horse harder, fear clawing at his throat. He'd lost Margaret to fever. He couldn't lose Thomas, too. Couldn't lose Emma. When had Emma become part of that fear? When had she stopped being the mail-order bride and become someone whose absence would tear a hole in his world? They found them in the old line shack near the north fence. Samuel dismounted before his horse fully stopped, pushing through the door into dim warmth. Emma sat against the wall with Thomas wrapped in her coat, pressed against her for warmth. Her face was too pale, lips tinged blue, but Thomas was pink-cheeked and drowsy warm. "Papa!" The boy scrambled up. "Emma found the shack. She kept me warm." Samuel knelt beside them, seeing Emma's hands. The fingers were white, nails dark, frostbite. She'd given Thomas her gloves, wrapped him in her coat, used her own body heat to keep him safe. "I'm fine," she said through chattering teeth. "Just cold." "You're half frozen." Samuel stripped off his coat, wrapped it around her. To his men, "Get a fire going, now." The storm raged outside, trapping them in the small shack. Samuel worked Emma's hands carefully, trying to restore circulation without causing more damage. She bit her lip against the pain, never crying out. Thomas fell asleep between them, exhausted by fear and warmth. In the firelight, Samuel met Emma's eyes. "You saved him. He's a child. Of course I saved him. You could have died, but I didn't." She was shaking, whether from cold or delayed fear, he couldn't tell. "The maps are lost, though." "All that work. I don't care about the maps. I care that you're alive." The words came out more intense than he'd intended. Emma stared at him, something shifting in her expression. "Samuel." "What did I hope for?" he interrupted. "When I sent for a mail-order bride? I hoped for companionship, for someone to make the house less empty, for someone to help Thomas remember what family feels like." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. I got more than I bargained for. I got someone who challenges me, who teaches me, who risks frostbite to save my son. I would do that for any child. I know. That's what makes you remarkable. Emma's eyes glistened. I was so afraid I'd fail here too. That my knowledge wouldn't be enough. That you'd send me away like the Philadelphia men who dismissed everything I said because I was female. Your father was right. The hardest part is watching people refuse to see truth because of who's telling them. Samuel held her cold hands gently. I see you, Emma. Thomas sees you. We need you here. Not just for what you know, but for who you are. She leaned her head against the wall, exhausted. I came west hoping my knowledge might matter somewhere. It does. You do. By morning, the storm had passed. They rode home through crystalline stillness. Emma on Samuel's horse, with his arms around her to steady her weakened body. Thomas rode with one of the hands, chattering about the adventure. Samuel felt Emma shiver against him and tightened his hold. When had she become essential rather than simply useful? When had the thought of losing her become unimaginable? But at home, disaster waited. The storm had damaged 3 sections of fence. Cattle had wandered into areas Emma hadn't yet cleared of toxic plants. By afternoon, 2 more animals were dead. The remaining hands gathered in the barn, their faces closed. Jake's voice carried clearly. These new methods aren't working fast enough. We're still losing cattle. The storm, Samuel started. The storm wouldn't have mattered if we'd kept the old rotation. Animal would have been in safe areas. In town the next day, Samuel heard the whispers. Saw the sideways looks. The Collins Ranch was failing under a woman's mismanagement. Samuel's judgment was clouded by a pretty face. The mail-order bride was running his operation into the ground. That night, a letter arrived from the bank. Standard language about reviewing loan status, assessing collateral, ensuring the operation remained viable. Samuel sat in his study staring at the letter, doubt flooding in like meltwater. What if he'd been wrong? What if desperation had made him foolish? What if he was sacrificing everything, his son's inheritance, his father's legacy, his last chance at stability, on unproven methods that sounded scientific but might be just more eccentric? Theories? Emma's frostbitten hands, more dead cattle, bank pressure, town gossip. The weight of it all pressed down until Samuel could barely breathe. Maybe the old ways weren't perfect, but at least they were familiar. At least they were proven. At least failure would be expected rather than humiliating. He put his head in his hands and let the darkness come. Thomas's fever started 3 days after the storm. Just a cold, Emma assured him, nothing serious. But Samuel couldn't stop remembering Margaret's fever, how it had seemed minor until it wasn't, how quickly everything had fallen apart. He sat by his son's bedside watching the boy sleep and felt failure pressing in from all sides. The ranch was still dying. He'd lost his foreman and half his hands. The bank was circling. His son was sick. And he'd gambled everything on a woman's untested theories because he'd been too desperate and too attracted to her to think clearly. His father would have seen this coming. Would have known Samuel was too weak, too easily swayed, too willing to abandon proven methods for pretty promises. Late that night, Samuel sat alone in his dark study. He didn't light the lamp. The darkness felt appropriate. He heard footsteps on the stairs. Then Emma appeared in the doorway. She stood there for a moment, looking at him, then crossed to his desk and set something down with a soft thump. She lit the lamp. In its glow, Samuel saw a stack of leather-bound journals, her father's research, days of careful observations. "What are you doing?" she asked quietly. "Thinking." "About giving up?" He couldn't deny it. "Maybe." Emma pulled out a journal and opened it to a marked page. This is from 1847. My father's first experiment with crop rotation. It failed completely. The plants died. The soil eroded. The neighboring farmers mocked him. She turned pages, showing him sketches of dead plants, notes about failed approaches. This is 1849. Another failure. Different method, same result. More pages, more failures, years of them. 1851. Partial success. Some plants survived. Not enough to be viable, but enough to suggest he was getting closer. She kept turning, showing him the gradual progression. Failures giving way to small successes. Small successes building on each other. Years of patient observation and adjustment. Science isn't about never being wrong, Emma said. It's about learning from what doesn't work and trying again. Your land isn't dying because you tried something new. It was already dying when I arrived. We're just fighting to save it. What if we fail? Then we'll have tried. We'll know more than we did. We'll adjust and try again. She met his eyes. Or, you can quit now. Send me away. Go back to the old methods. Accept slow decline because at least it's familiar. Her words stung. You think I'm a coward? I think you're terrified. I think you've been pretending to be adequate for so long that actually learning feels like admitting you've been a fraud. I think you're more afraid of trying and failing than of never trying at all. Samuel felt his jaw tighten. You don't know. I watched my father face this every single day for 30 years. People calling him eccentric, mocking his methods, waiting for him to fail so they could feel superior. He kept working anyway, kept observing, kept learning. And you know what killed him? Not his work, not his failures, just time and age and bad luck. She leaned forward, her voice intense. His research worked, Samuel. It just took time. And it took courage to keep going when everyone around him said he was wrong. I thought the frontier might be braver than Philadelphia. That people who'd already left everything behind might be willing to try new things. She paused. Was I wrong? Are you going to quit because change is hard and people talk? The challenge hung between them. Samuel felt it scrape against his pride, his fear, his desperate need for certainty in an uncertain world. Thomas needs me, he said weakly. Thomas needs you to be brave, to show him that learning isn't weakness, that admitting you don't know something is the first step to knowing it. Emma's voice softened. He's watching you, Samuel, learning what kind of man to become. What are you teaching him? Samuel closed his eyes. She was right. God help him. She was right. From upstairs, Thomas called out. Emma went to him, her footsteps quick on the stairs. Samuel heard her voice, gentle and reassuring, heard Thomas's fever-rough responses. She was teaching him even now, showing him pressed plants from her collection, explaining their properties in words a 6-year-old could grasp. He climbed the stairs and stood in the doorway watching them. Thomas's cheeks were flushed, but his eyes were bright with interest. Emma sat on the edge of his bed, patient and kind, answering his questions about leaf shapes and root structures. Is Emma staying forever? Thomas asked suddenly, looking past her to Samuel. Samuel met Emma's eyes across the lamplight. In them he saw everything. Her fear of failure, her hope for acceptance, her fierce determination to prove her father's work mattered. I want her to, Samuel said, if she'll stay. As what? Emma asked quietly. The mail-order bride you hired? The teacher you tolerate? The woman who keeps house while you pretend her? Knowledge doesn't matter? As my partner, Samuel said. The word felt inadequate, but true. In everything. The ranch, Thomas's education, building something neither of us could build alone. Emma's eyes glistened. On what terms? Whatever terms you want. He stopped, finding courage. I need you here, Emma. Thomas needs you here. Not just your knowledge, though God knows we need that too. We need you. The person who challenges me to be better, who teaches instead of commands, who risks frostbite for my son. I need you. I won't be property, she said softly. I won't be decorative or silent or small. I wouldn't want you to be. She studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded once, decisive. Then I'll stay, as your partner. We succeed or fail together. Relief flooded through Samuel, so intense it was almost painful. Thomas grinned from his bed, oblivious to the deeper currents. Does this mean Emma's my mother now? If she agrees, Samuel said. Emma touched Thomas's hair gently. I'd be honored. That night, after Thomas had finally slept, Samuel and Emma sat at the kitchen table with her maps and journals spread between them. They planned spring strategy, systematic clearing schedules, replanting priorities, new rotation patterns. 3 people working by lamplight, rebuilding hope, one careful decision at a time. Samuel looked at Emma across the papers and realized the fear hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something manageable, something he could face with help. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For not letting me quit. For being brave enough to challenge me. He paused. For staying. Emma smiled, tired and real. Thank you for being willing to learn. Most men aren't. Outside, the Montana night stretched cold and clear. Inside, a family formed itself through shared purpose and stubborn hope. The land was still sick. The bank was still watching. The town was still gossiping. But they were facing it together now. And that made all the difference. Spring came to Montana like a promise being kept. The snow melted, the ground softened, and Emma's systematic plans launched into action. They worked from dawn to dusk, clearing toxic plants section by section, replanting with the nutritious forage Emma had specified. Samuel learned as he worked, learned to recognize plant species by their emerging shoots, learned how soil composition affected growth patterns, why certain areas needed longer recovery time before grazing could resume. Emma taught constantly, answering his questions with patience, showing rather than telling whenever possible. Thomas participated with eager energy, his vocabulary expanding to include terms like nitrogen fixation and symbiotic relationships. He could identify a dozen plant species by their leaves alone, explain why rotation prevented overgrazing, describe how root systems affected soil health. Samuel watched his son thrive and felt something ancient ease in his chest. This was education. Not just memorizing facts, but understanding systems. Not just following orders, but grasping principles. The cattle began recovering, slowly at first, then with increasing visibility. Animal in the cleared and replanted areas showed better weight, healthier coats, more energy. The losses stopped. For 3 weeks, then 4, then 6, not a single animal died. Other ranchers started visiting. Some came to mock, making pointed comments about book learning and women's place. Samuel smiled and showed them the recovering herds, explained the science Emma had taught him, gave her full credit for every improvement. Others came with genuine curiosity, men who'd watched their own operations struggle, who recognized desperation in Samuel's gamble and hope in his results. They asked careful questions. Samuel answered them, frequently turning to Emma for clarification or detail she could provide better than he could. "You're not embarrassed?" one neighbor asked. "Taking advice from a woman?" "I was dying of pride," Samuel said simply. "Emma saved my life by teaching me to set it aside." The town's gossip shifted. Not everyone approved, but results were hard to argue with. The Collins Ranch was recovering. The cattle were thriving. Whatever unusual methods they were using, they were working. In early May, the bank officer arrived unannounced. Samuel met him in the yard, preparing for the foreclosure discussion he'd been dreading. Instead, the officer walked through the operation with assessing eyes, taking notes. He examined the cattle, the replanted grazing areas, the systematic charts Emma had created showing rotation schedules and recovery timelines. "This is impressive work, Mr. Collins." "Thank you. My wife deserves the credit. She designed the entire system." "Your wife?" The officer's eyebrows rose. "The mail-order bride from Philadelphia?" "My partner," Samuel corrected. "And yes." The officer made more notes. Finally, he nodded. "The bank is satisfied with the operation's trajectory. We'll extend your loan terms. The interest rate will remain favorable, provided you maintain current productivity levels." After he left, Samuel found Emma in the garden she'd planted behind the house. She was kneeling in the dirt, teaching Thomas about companion planting. Tomatoes next to basil, beans near corn, marigolds at the borders to discourage pests. "The bank extended our loan," Samuel said. Emma looked up, dirt on her hands and hope in her eyes. "They saw the improvements?" "They saw what you built, what we built together." She stood, brushing off her skirt. Thomas went back to planning with careful concentration. "We saved it," Emma said quietly. "You saved it. I just learned to listen." "No," she shook her head. "You were willing to learn. That takes more courage than people understand. Most men would have let their pride kill everything rather than admit they needed help." They stood there in the garden, the afternoon sun warm on their faces, and Samuel felt the pieces of his life finally settling into place. Not the life he'd imagined. Not the safe, predictable existence he'd tried to maintain after Margaret's death. Something better. Something earned through struggle and trust and letting go of who he'd pretended to be. "Emma," he said carefully, "I need to ask you something." She waited, patient as always. "Will you marry me? Not because it was arranged, not because you're already here, because I love who you are. Because I love what we're building together. Because I can't imagine my life, or Thomas's life, without you in it." Emma smiled, the expression transforming her face. "I wondered when you'd ask. Is that a yes?" "That's a yes, on one condition. We go forward as equals, partners in everything. I'm not your property, or your decoration, or your silent helpmate. I'm your partner. I wouldn't have it any other way." "Then yes, I'll marry you." Thomas looked up from his planting, grinning. "Does this mean we're really a family now?" Samuel crouched beside his son. "We've been a family for a while. This just makes it official." That evening, standing in the recovering pastures at sunset, the three of them watched new growth green the land. Cattle grazed peacefully, healthy and thriving. The toxic plants were gone. The soil was recovering. The operation that had been dying 6 months ago now stood on solid ground. Samuel took Emma's hand. She leaned against him comfortably, naturally. Two people who'd learned to fit together through trial and trust. "I prayed for a wife by Christmas," Samuel said quietly. "God sent me a partner who saved our future." "I came west hoping my knowledge might matter somewhere," Emma replied. "I found a place where I matter, not despite what I know, but because of it." Thomas ran ahead, pointing at something in the grass. "Come see this plant. I think it's the one you showed me, but I want to make sure before I write it down." They walked forward together toward their son, toward the future they were building with knowledge and courage and love. A family forged not through convention, but through respect for what each person brought to their shared table. The land stretched green and promising around them, no longer dying, but growing, just like the family itself. They married in late May in the small church in town. Thomas stood beside them, grinning so wide Samuel thought the boy's face might split. The guest list was small but meaningful. The ranch hands who'd stayed loyal, a few town friends, and several neighboring ranchers who'd started adopting Emma's rotation methods. The preacher spoke about partnership and respect, about two people building something together that neither could build alone. "This is what marriage should be," he said, looking at them with approval. Two people bringing different strengths to a common purpose. Emma wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself. Samuel wore his best suit. Thomas wore new boots he'd specifically requested for the occasion. They spoke their vows clearly, meaning every word. In the weeks that followed, new rhythms established themselves. Emma taught Thomas each afternoon, their lessons expanding from agricultural science to mathematics, literature, history. Samuel often joined them, making up for gaps in his own education. He'd spent so many years pretending to know everything that the freedom to admit ignorance and learn felt almost intoxicating. The three of them worked the land together, implementing the systems Emma had designed. The ranch's reputation transformed. Other operations began sending hands to learn their methods. Several neighboring ranches requested Emma's consultation on their rotation schedules. Emma wrote to agricultural journals, submitting her father's research alongside her own frontier applications. Several journals published her work, vindication for both her father's legacy and her own expertise. Letters arrived from farmers back east, asking questions, requesting advice, acknowledging that maybe the eccentric experimental farmer had been onto something after all. The garden Emma had planted became her teaching laboratory. She grew demonstration plants there, showing rotation principles in miniature. Neighboring ranchers' children started visiting in the afternoons, drawn by Thomas's enthusiastic descriptions of what he was learning. Soon Emma was teaching 6 children, then 8, then a dozen. "I think you're starting a school," Samuel said one evening, watching from the porch as Emma explained pollination to a cluster of eager young faces. "I think I am," she agreed, looking pleased. One July evening, in the privacy of their bedroom, Emma took Samuel's hand and placed it on her belly. "I'm pregnant." Samuel felt his breath catch. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Joy flooded through him, mixed with the inevitable fear. Is everything? "Everything's fine. I feel good, strong." She smiled at his obvious nervousness. "It's going to be all right." He pulled her close, feeling the solid reality of her in his arms. A partner. A wife. Even when you ask the same question 3 times because you're not sure you understood the concept. He laughed, despite his emotion. "I'm a slow learner." "You're a thorough learner. There's a difference." The next morning at breakfast, they told Thomas. His reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. He whooped with joy, then immediately started asking questions about embryonic development and gestation periods. Emma answered them all with patient thoroughness while Samuel sat back and marveled at the family they'd created. Late May turned to June. The land continued its recovery, green and healthy and productive. Samuel following the routes Emma had first mapped in winter cold 6 months ago. They paused, watching his foreman drag a dead heifer from frozen ground. The same location, utterly transformed. Green grass grew thick. Cattle grazed peacefully. The toxic plants were gone, replaced by nutritious forage that sustained rather than poisoned. "What are you thinking?" Emma asked. Samuel was quiet for a moment, looking at the land, at his son running ahead with Emma's plant identification notebook, at his pregnant wife standing beside him, strong and sure. "I prayed for a wife by Christmas, someone to make the house less empty, someone to help raise Thomas. And God sent me a partner who saved our future, who taught me what partnership really means, who showed me that strength isn't pretending you have all the answers, it's having the courage to learn." Emma leaned against him, her hand resting on her belly where their child grew. "I came west hoping my knowledge might matter somewhere, hoping I could prove my father's work wasn't pointless. hoping someone would see me as more than just a woman who should cook and clean and stay quiet. Did you find what you were looking for? I found more. I found a place where I matter because of what I know. I found a son who loves learning. I found a husband who treats me as an equal. She paused, thoughtful. I found home. Ahead of them, Thomas called back, "Come see this." I think it's the plant you showed me, but I want to make sure before I write it down. They walked forward together toward their son, toward the future they were building, one careful observation at a time. A family forged not through convention, but through respect for what each person brought. A partnership built on teaching and learning, on admitting weakness and celebrating strength, on growing together through shared struggle. The sun settled toward the horizon, painting the recovered land in gold and amber. Cattle grazed peacefully. New growth pushed through healthy soil. In the distance, the house stood solid and welcoming, no longer a grand, empty shell, but a home filled with purpose and presence. Samuel squeezed Emma's hand. She squeezed back. They walked forward together, 3 people becoming 4, building something that would last, not because tradition demanded it, but because knowledge and love sustained it. The land stretched green and promising around them, no longer dying but growing, no longer poisoned but healing. Just like the family itself, transformed from isolation and fear into partnership and hope. Just like the man who'd prayed for a wife and received instead a partner who taught him that true strength lies not in having all the answers, but in having the courage to learn them. The garden grew. The family grew. The future earned through patient work and stubborn faith, and the quiet courage of people willing to change. And that, Samuel thought, was worth more than any inheritance his father could have left him.